Thanks for that lovely personification of me. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to talk to Gavin Francis today about his book, Empire Antarctica, Ice, Silence and Empire Penguins, which won the 2018 Scottish Book Award. Gavin's actually trained as a doctor, and I read somewhere that he continues to practice 2 days a week, but he has the restless curiosity of a real explorer, as well as this wonderful writing style that's so vivid, compelling, and poetic that even someone like me who doesn't like the cold was a little tempted to experience the ice and cold of Antarctica. The book we're talking about today is based on the 14 months he spent as the base camp doctor at the British Research Station in an especially remote part of Antarctica, which freezes over for 10 months of the year, making it impossible to leave the station. And apparently it's actually easier to evacuate someone from an international space station than it is to evacuate someone from this base once the ice is frozen. The book is very much a celebration of the stark and haunting beauty and isolation of Antarctica and the people, including early explorers, who are drawn to it. As the title of the session suggests, the book is truly a love letter to Antarctica. So what we're going to do first is Gavin is sharing some of the pictures he's taken from there, and then he's going to do a little bit of a reading from the book. Hopefully there's still copies of the book available. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. If it's not available, you should petition the bookstore, I don't know if they're here, to get more copies.
You should write to Penguin Random House.
Yes, you can. And then afterwards, hopefully we'll have some time for questions. It's a very short session, so we're just talking about the fact that we might not have a lot of time for questions from the audience, but there's tea breaks, there's all sorts of breaks that Gavin is definitely around. You can ask him questions. So maybe we'll move on to the slideshow.
Thank you, Dom, very much for that introduction. Yesterday, I received a lot of comments and a lot of positive comments, also a lot of flack for wearing a kilt. I'm not wearing a kilt today, but I have brought you a picture of a Scotsman in the Antarctic. And there's a long tradition of Scotsmen going to the Antarctic. This is a photo taken in 1904 by the Scottish National Antarctic Expedition. At that stage, it wasn't even known that Antarctica was a continent. It was thought it was just a set of islands. And these guys, this bagpiper was from Edinburgh, and they went almost as far south as the base, where I lived for 15 months. So that's the starting off point, is that there is about a 100-year history of Scots going to the Antarctic. And the base that I went to is this one down at the bottom called Halley. So I signed up as the doctor. I'd been studying emergency medicine. They sent me to Plymouth, where there's a military hospital in the UK, and trained me up in how to do all the remote things I may need to do, pull out teeth and give anesthetics and so on. And then I joined a ship and sailed there. It took me about 2.5 months to arrive. And that, you see that Weddell Sea, the name of the large Antarctic Sea. It looks beautiful and clear and blue, but actually it's frozen all year round. And it's just, in winter it's frozen solid, and in summer it's ice floes that gently turn and rotate and often wreck ships. So I arrived there in mid-summer, but this was my view of the Weddell Sea. The ship had to pick its way very, very slowly through that sea in order to reach the continent itself. But the continent itself, when we did reach there, was magnificent. This is a view of the area very close to the base. Everything you can see in the foreground is frozen sea. It's sea ice, about 4 meters thick, even in midsummer. And the cliffs you can see along the horizon are freshwater, continental glacial ice flowing off the continent of Antarctica, all the way from the South Pole, about 1,000 miles to the South Pole from there. And these two native Antarcticans you can see in the foreground, they are guys that have been on the base for a year, isolated, and the ship has arrived and they've come down to meet the ship and drink fresh beer, because all the beer they've had for a year on base has started to taste like metal. I'm just going to give you a very quick read. Donna asked me to do a couple of quick readings. I won't read for too long because we don't have a lot of time. But I wanted to give you just a taste of the way I try and approach describing the landscape in Antarctica. The very kind of singular landscape, very simple, very elemental, just ice and sky, no rocks, no towns, very few creatures. This describes the ship arriving, coming along the edge of the ice cliffs. Cruising along the plains of ice, a relentless eternity of stretched and unraveling ice, I wondered at the colossal weight of its silence, at the extraordinary fact of its emptiness. The spread heart of Antarctica was staked out beneath a merciless sky. The ice seemed to bear up that sky, cradling its weight with the broadest of palms. And comparative theologians tell us that most human societies start out with a sky god, a stern patriarch who glowers from on high, holding humanity at his pleasure. The Greeks castrated theirs and threw in their lot with Apollo and Aphrodite, but gods of the earth and of the seasons make little sense at 75 degrees south. Beneath an Antarctic sky, I felt the need to restore a sky god and beg for protection. The sky is just extraordinary in Antarctica because it's so flat and there's no disruption in your horizon. And because for the whole summer period it's light 24 hours a day, the sun just moves around the horizon. You always feel this relentless blast of light, and there's very little ozone there. The ozone hole was discovered at Halley, and so the light is extraordinarily strong. You're sunburned within minutes of going out in it. So this is a picture from the air of the ship arriving at the base. And you can see the ship has had to carve out its own harbour from the sea ice by breaking away, and has started to offload its cargo, and that cargo will all be dragged up onto the shelf that you see behind, which is just an immense plain of ice which stretches for 1,000 miles to the pole. And the base itself is just a small series of tiny little buildings on stilts because the ice is constantly accumulating and buries any building within a couple of years. So they built them on stilts and jacked the buildings up. And this was the place I was going to spend a whole year. The summer period, when it's light 24 hours a day, and there's about 2 months the ship can come in and can come out. And so the population is quite high in the summer, about 60 people. And those 60 people are mostly conducting science, research on the ozone, climate change, meteorologists. These are launching weather balloons. They also study the magnetic field of the Earth and solar storms, because it's a very good place for which to measure solar activity. And that period of time in the summer is also a good time to get out and explore the continent away from the base as much as possible. It's just the scale of it is so immense. This picture shows an iceberg calving away from the continent, but just before the iceberg is broken away to float, it's frozen in again for another winter. And so it's left this extraordinarily long cavern that stretched for 1 kilometre into the ice. And you can walk through it, and because the ice is translucent, the light continues all the way 1 kilometre through the crack. It just becomes progressively more and more ultraviolet, as if you're in a nightclub, everything glowing. And after the brief summer period, the population goes from 60 to 14. This is a picture taken of the supply ship leaving after that 2-month period. And you can see the picture I showed you at the beginning of arriving with all that sea ice, 4 meters thick. It's all gone. And the ship is now able to reverse right up to the ice cliffs. And it picked the people up with a cargo net on a crane. You just hold onto the crane and the crane lifts you up, puts you on the ship. These are the engineers of the ship laughing at a guy who came down for a 2-week trip and agreed to stay on for a 2-year contract. So they're telling him that they're coming back for him with a straitjacket. But the summer period is very short, and before you know it, we start to get darkness. The sun drops below the horizon, and it starts appearing for less and less time each day. And just as we had 3.5 months of constant sunlight, we're going to have 3.5 months of constant darkness. And it's a time when people start to gather more and more to themselves into the buildings. They start to settle down for the winter as if they're hibernating. I get very claustrophobic. I always have to go out every day for long periods of time. I started to find excuses to go out, even to the extent of doing my ironing. This is me ironing a bed sheet in a 100-knot gale. And shortly after that, there's no more light at all. You know, it's just dark all the time, but it's a magnificent place to watch auroras. Because it's at a point close to the magnetic pole, I should explain, and there's a belt of very high frequency of auroras around the Antarctic, and Halley lies right under one of those zones of very high auroral frequency. And auroras filling the night sky, because it's night, 24 hours a day is dark sky. Those auroras you can see very, very regularly. Another magnificent light phenomena, these are halos around a full moon caused by frost crystals. And this is a lunar pillar, a moon pillar caused by frost crystals, causing the light to gather into a column and drop down, splashing onto the ice. And the temperatures get lower and lower, down to about minus 50, minus 55. I showed this picture yesterday too. This is a picture showing what you have to wear when you go out in those temperatures. And all that ice is just caused by freezing of my breath as I've been skiing around the base. Because it very rarely snows there. Of course it doesn't rain, you live for a year without rain. And after 3.5 months of darkness, the sun starts to come back. And finally you see it above the horizon again with these wonderful halos. And before you know it, you're back to 24-hour daylight again on this endless plain of ice. And the ship starts coming back towards us. So that was a very quick tour of what it's like to pass a year on the continent. I'm going to even more quickly show you a little bit about emperor penguins, because I love emperor penguins very much. And when I lived there, the colony of emperor penguins was the only connection I had to the living world, if you like, because there were no other creatures that survived there. The only things that can survive that far south, above the water, are emperor penguins that do it on their own, and humans that do it with an awful lot of help. All the other species leave for the winter. And so whenever I wanted to go and visit the penguins, I would have to get on a skidoo and skidoo out for a few kilometres to the edge of the cliffs here. And the penguins live down on the sea ice. And then abseil off the cliffs, it's about 30 metres, 40 metre cliffs. And you can just about see them in this slide, this sort of black smudge on the ice on the horizon. And that's the beginning of 60,000 emperor penguins. And when we arrived in the summertime, the chicks are almost fully grown. Midsummer, the chicks are almost starting to fledge. And the adults, you don't see many of them. The sea comes right up to the edge of the ice, whereas in winter it extends for thousands of miles. April, which is autumn, April is the time when the new sea ice forms, and the penguins gather for another whole year. I mean, they have this awful, very grueling life cycle. They spend 9 or 10 months of the year raising chicks. And this is them gathering again to start another new year in April. And I was going to do another short reading, describing what it's like to try and go and visit the penguins at that time. Autumn in Antarctica. Sunrise and sunset merge in firestorms of light that seem to warn of the coming darkness. And at 75 degrees south, the polar night of winter will last 3.5 months. The light in Antarctica is refracted and reflected between ice and sky, as though through a hall of mirrors. The continent bathes in the colours of flame as the autumn days grow colder. Last year's sea ice has all been broken out by the storms of summer. And it's April, soon after the autumnal equinox, and the refreezing of the sea is already well advanced. Emperor penguins are returning from a summer fishing, fat and gleaming, to mate on the new sea ice close to the edge of the continent. They're the only species evolved to survive these coasts through the winter. and that they breathe through it, carrying eggs on their feet as they shuffle through the darkness, is one of the wonders of the natural world. This show, you can just about see in this slide a penguin there with a bulge on his feet, that's it, carrying an egg. And the male penguins who are incubating these eggs, they fast for 4 months, because for that 4-month period there is so much sea ice, they can't get through it to fish, and they can't walk far enough. So they just have evolved to fast. So from April to August they fast, but then just in time for the sun to come back up, the chicks are hatched. The baby penguins are timed to be hatched just when the female emperor penguins come back to feed them. And it's a wonderful sight to see the fat female emperor penguins who are double the weight of the males by this point. The males have lost half their body weight during a 4-month fast. The females come back with a belly full of fish just in time to feed the chicks, and the chicks get bigger and bigger very, very quickly. This is a gang of adult emperors that don't have a chick, and they've got such a strong mothering instinct that they're all trying to get this chick onto their feet. They run after them and they try everything they can to get them on their feet to protect them from the coldness of the ice. But the chicks, when they start to get to that size, want a bit of independence. They run away, they start gathering into these sort of creche-like large groups, looking after one another. And by the time they're that size, they don't need to be on the parents' feet anymore. And so that's September, October. And by the time we're back to December, they're fledging. The chicks are starting to get adult feathers that they need in order to swim. And that's me taking you through a full year of the penguins' lives as well. So after a year of that, I was getting ready to leave as well, not just the penguins. This is me next to the signpost at the base. I come from a small place in Scotland called Fife. It says, Kingdom of Fife, 14,000 kilometres on the sign. And I didn't just go skiing and writing and reading all the time. The boiler suit is my efforts to work in the generator room and fix my skidoo. So, thanks very much for listening to me take you through a quick year in the life of the base and the sky and the ice, and a year in the life of the emperor penguins that are such a beautiful, inspirational part of Antarctica. And Dova mentioned there was some books for sale, but apparently there isn't. So, not to worry. We're going to chat a little bit, but I hope we'll have time for questions, and then you can come and collar me later on if you'd like to.
So, I don't know if anyone has any questions after seeing the baby penguins. I mean, that's all I have in my head right now. But I thought I would ask you about the other living creatures on that continent, which were your fellow basemates. There were 14 of you trapped in each other's company for 10 months in a fairly small space. And you had talked before, earlier in the book, before you even got there, about how you were anticipating sardine can living at the bottom of the world. And you have some interesting things to say about the social dynamics. But what's very interesting is that the dedication of the book is partially to your basemates, so that means they're all still talking to you after you wrote the book. I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about living in a confined space with people, and also how they felt about what you had written.
There's a wonderful travel writer, journalist, reporter, I'm sure many of you have read, Martha Gellhorn. And Martha Gellhorn wrote, after living with some expat communities in Africa, she wrote, they all know each other too well and too little, like jailmates. And it's a little like that. When you're living in a place where you can't possibly leave. People share themselves very tentatively. You don't want to make any enemies. You can make some very good friends, of course, but there's certain aspects people keep private because you can't possibly get away. So if somebody bears their soul to someone else and then friendship doesn't flourish, it could become very difficult. And so, yeah, I got to know all of them very well, they got to know me very well, but we also retained our own sense of independence and privacy. And I checked with all of the basemates before that they were happy for me to use their real names, and also that they were happy for me to write about certain aspects of life there. And yeah, I dedicated it to them because you can't, there's some people might try and romanticize living in the Antarctic as some sort of place of a primal struggle of one person, but of course it's not. You can't live there on your own. You know, I was the doctor in case anyone got sick. We had a generator mechanic, we had a mountaineer to help us when we went exploring. We had an electrician, a plumber. We had all these people who were all helping us get along. And so, yeah, we were all essential to the running of the base, really. There's not a great deal written that's that controversial in it.
Those parts are probably only in your memory.
Yeah, they're still speaking to me all the time. We had a reunion recently.
That's good news. It's really clear from both this book and your other writing that you're someone who really loves traveling. I think I read somewhere that you've been to all 7 continents at this point. So that's clearly a passion. But where does writing come in? Was that something you also always wanted to do? Or I know there was sort of a 10-year gap between your trip to Antarctica and your writing about it.
Yeah, I have always been a great reader, and I think it's natural if you're a reader. It was natural anyway for me, if I'm a reader, to want to write a book that I would enjoy reading. So my wish to travel comes from having grown up in a small place in Scotland and never having left Britain until I was 18. And so I felt like I had a lot to catch up on. And I found when I started to travel, first with trips around Europe, then with trips to Africa, then with trips to Latin America, and then Asia. And I found that I enjoyed it so much that I learned so much about myself and so much about the planet that I couldn't give it up. And then because I'm a reader, it was natural for me to want to transform those experiences and those perspectives into literature. I mean, for me, literature is, lots of people have lots of different definitions of literature, and there's a lot of snobbishness about some of them, but for me, literature is something that helps transform your perspective, give you new vision of things, and also, somebody very famous once said that great literature is when a writer leaves something beautiful on the page. That's all they have to try and do, is leave something beautiful for other people to read and to feel moved by. And I think that's what I try to do with my writing, is leave something beautiful and try and help somebody show a new perspective on a part of the world, or a part of society, or a part of a culture.
That leads me perfectly to the next question, which is what are you working on right now? There've been, based on my Googling, there's a little bit of a conflicting information. One thing people had said you were working on was a book on medicine and the body called Adventures in the Human Being, but there were also reports that you're writing about this part of the world, the Himalayas.
Well, truly, I would love to write about the Himalayas, and it's a long-term project. Because I think it's very difficult for people like me to write now about this part of the world. There's been so many of us Northwest Europeans coming and spraying around their opinions about this part of the world, and I'm fascinated by that tension, that conflict. I don't want to contribute to that. I don't want to redo something that's been done. I'm also very sensitive to the fact that some people in this part of the world, some people in South Asia think, enough, we've had enough of guys like you from the other end of Eurasia coming and telling us your opinions. And so it's a book that I would love very much to write, but I'm also in no hurry. I'm not going to rush it out. I'm going to think very carefully about it. The other project that you mentioned is a book about the human body, and that's come from, because I work 2 days a week as a doctor and 2 days a week as a writer, I've increasingly been doing essays about medicine. And for me, my first love was geography. I wanted to be a geographer, and only later I became a doctor. And my vision of the body is very much like my vision of the planet in a way. The body reflects the world around us in so many ways. Atlas of the World is in many ways similar to an atlas of anatomy. And I'm using the techniques and the perspectives of a travel writer, an essayist, and turning them onto aspects of the body, different organs of the body. And so the reason it's called Adventures in Human Beings is because I feel like sometimes when I set out in a clinic, it really is like an adventure. You know, it's like going on a journey because I never know where I'm going to end up. And I never know what the patient sitting opposite me is going to say. You know, they might say, I'm hearing voices. They might say, I've got a sore toe. They might even just be coming to me about a regular checkup about diabetes. But I never know what somebody's going to say. And I feel that those sorts of journeys I make in the clinic are just as valid explorations of our inner world as travel writing is of the outer world.
I think we'll look forward to both books in the near future. I think we've only got 5 minutes, so maybe time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience.
Thank you. This is a very fascinating session, and I want to thank you for this session. I do have a quick question, 2-part question for Mr. Francis, sir. But before that, I do want to also say to Amdolma, I live in Bhutan, but I've also visited all 7 continents, and Antarctica being the most fascinating continent I've seen. It is absolutely magnificent. And I have a 2-part question for Sir Gavin Francis. First question is, I saw a lot of emperor penguins too, and we were there, but we saw a whole bunch of chin-strapped penguins. My first question is, what are the natural predators for these penguins? And the second question is not a loaded one, but we live in Bhutan, and environment is very important for us. The global warming aspect is very important to us, and it's not a loaded question. When we went there, there's a little bit of confusion. Some said the ice shelves are all melting and everything, and the seas are going to increase in the spans of time, and island nations can be melted down. And there are others who are saying, no, not really. So I was confused. Which one is right?
Well, the answer to your first question, chin-strap penguins are little penguins that are about this size.
Yes.
And they are eaten by leopard seals and killer whales, basically. And leopard seals are the alpha predators of the Antarctic, the equivalent niche of a polar bear in the north. And there are these great big, long, eel-like, muscular seals that swim very fast and they eat penguins. So in terms of climate change, the answer is it's definitely happening. So far it seems to be making the peninsula, so the part of Antarctica that points towards South America, it's rapidly warming the peninsula. And so ice shelves that are calving off and breaking up, that is where it's happening. And so we're losing ice cover there. And we're also losing emperor penguin colonies because emperor penguins are evolved for sea ice. And if the sea ice melts before the chicks have fledged, they all drown. So a lot of penguin colonies on the peninsula are dying out. Where Antarctica is not getting colder, further south where I was, it's warmer, it's getting colder. It's actually getting windier and colder. So climate change, which is causing all these increase in hurricanes and changes in the North Atlantic drift and so on in the north, that is causing so far Antarctica to get slightly colder and slightly windier. But it's a temporary effect. And there's no doubt that it's happening, but also that Antarctica has only been frozen over twice in the last 500 million years. And it seems that we are coming to the end of that phase. You know, most of the history of the planet Earth, Antarctica has been unfrozen. It's been a lot warmer than it is now. But we've had a very long phase of quite stable climate now, and that's starting to change. And what the debate is not about whether we're warming, the debate is about how fast we're warming and how much of that is humanity's influence. So it's definitely happening, but lots of people disagree about the rate and the cause.
The last request is, how do we get a copy of that book, Empire Antarctica, if it's not available?
Well, here it is available. It's just that it's published in the UK and it's Commonwealth, so you would need to order it. It would take a while, or you could just get it immediately on a Kindle or something.
Thank you very much.
I think we have time for only 1 more question.
If you don't have time, you can try to find me afterwards.
How many books did you take along? And can you give us a few titles of the books that you read?
I wrote my first book in the Antarctic. My first book is about the Arctic. And I'd been training in emergency medicine and working very hard, very long hours, and I hadn't had time to actually write. And I'd made this journey around the Arctic that I wanted to write a book about. And I thought, I'm going to go to the Antarctic, I have nothing to do for a year, apart from ski and look after people who are all fit and healthy. So I took a trunk of about 100 books, all about the Arctic, and everything from the old Irish myths from the Dark Ages of St. Brendan, and all the sagas, the Icelandic sagas, the 17th century whalers that explored Greenland, Dylan Barents and so on. And then there's a whole slew of 19th century explorers, Northwest Passage, Northeast Passage, all of those. So yeah, I had a big trunk full of books. And it's wonderful, at one point I tried to find a metaphor to describe this time you've got. When you've been in medicine and you're working, studying, and suddenly you've got all this time on your hands. I realized that I could actually sit down and read the Mahabharata if I wanted. A Mahabharata and Ramayana of time ahead of me. So I could have read all those, but I had all these Arctic books to read as well. And all the Antarctic classic explorers, Scott, Shackleton, Amundsen, of course.
Might have been nicer to take something about Africa, nice and warm.
I took a big coffee table book about the Amazon jungle, because I thought I would want to look at that, and actually I never opened it.
I think unfortunately we're completely out of time, but Gavin is here for the rest of the afternoon. Please catch him and ask him a question, or two or three. Thank you so much, also for bringing the pictures that really helped to get us in a colder mindset.
Thank you very much, Loman, and thank you all for having me here.